Something snapped in that room the moment the numbers hit the table, because when Rand Paul laid out the math, the entire $46 billion border plan cracked open like a hollow shell. One senator wasn't supposed to unravel an entire funding narrative in under a minute, but that's exactly what happened. And the deeper the questioning went, the more obvious it became that something inside DHS isn't just messy, it's broken. What viewers saw wasn't a routine budget discussion. It was a live demonstration of what happens when a massive national security agency can't explain its own spending.
But let's just say there's 1,000. You really want a wall on 1,000. CBP says it's 6.5 million per mile. Your response today was 12 million per mile. That means $12 billion for 1,000 miles. We're off here by a factor of 3 or 4 with 46 billion. Where's the rest of the 46 billion? The administration says they want 46 billion for a wall. You could pave all of it and still have, 34 billion left over. What's the 34 billion going for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. We do have 702 miles of wall today. 598 of that are steel. The rest of that is temporary that's in place. Since the president's been in office, over 70 miles has been erected. We have 11 contracts that have gone out and allocated. We also have 5 more that are pending. Based on the dollars that have been requested, it's not just the infrastructure that would be built that would be the actual wall construction. It would be also surveillance equipment.
The number's way off. 1,000. You could do 1,000 miles for 12 billion. You're asking for 46 billion. So I'm one who's not impressed and would have to see more detail as to where the rest of the money goes. We can't just throw $30 billion out there and say things cost a lot.
I agree. We'll get you the specifics on that.
With regard to the drones and all the preparatory work that DHS does and the government does for the NFL and for FIFA, does the NFL pay DHS for the work you do?
Boy, not to my knowledge. I will.
Well, I mean, here's my point. The NFL makes billions of dollars. We're $2 trillion in the hole. I don't care if government shares their technology and government helps out the World Cup. They ought to pay.
Yeah,
people are paying hundreds of dollars for tickets. I mean, thousands of dollars for the NFL, for Super Bowl and things. They're also paying for FIFA, and so these people ought to pay. And so I'm one holding up these authorizations, and I'll let them go forward. But I want people to pay. I mean, it's ridiculous that the average taxpayer who could never afford to go to an NFL Super Bowl has got to pay for their security. Should the government help? If we have technology they don't, perhaps. But they ought to pay. So NFL, FIFA, I think they all ought to pay. And we'll be insisting on trying to put language in that. If you're a for-profit entity and the government's helping you, you ought to pay for it. With regard to TSA Quiet Skies and Tulsi Gabbard situation, I suspect there are going to be other people that were caught up in this thing as well. I'm horrified by the idea that we took a former congresswoman and we're surveilling her and riding on jets with her. There was another story of an air marshal whose wife, might have been at January 6th or something, and now we're, have air marshals following another air marshal or his wife. So I want to hear the whole story of what happened. I want to hear that people have been let go, that they're no longer doing this. If there were abuses of Tulsi Gabbard's liberties, I want to hear from that. But I want repercussions to come from this. And I think you've said something's coming. Please let us know, and let us know how the program the destruction of civil liberties can be minimized. I frankly probably have trouble with the whole program, but let's see if there's some way. But we need significant reform. If it needs legislation, please come to us with that. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Secretary Noem, for being here.
And once the numbers fell apart, everything else, corporate favoritism, secret surveillance, uneven enforcement, started spilling out right behind it. Paul didn't walk into this hearing trying to expose a scandal. He walked in asking for basic clarity, miles, cost, estimates. Straightforward, right? But the moment he pressed the actual figures, everything derailed. The border is roughly 1,950 miles. Around 700 plus miles have fencing. That leaves about 1,200 miles. Realistically, maybe 1,000 miles are buildable. And CBP estimates the cost at about $6.5 million per mile. Noem, however, says it's $12 million per mile. Fine, take her higher estimate. That still lands around $12 billion. But DHS isn't asking for $12 billion. They're asking for $46.5 billion. That's a gap the size of a small country's annual budget. And when Paul points this out, Noem doesn't even try to bridge it. She lists numbers: 702 miles of wall, steel versus temporary fencing, 70 miles built since inauguration, contracts in progress. But none of this even touches the missing $30+ billion. This wasn't just a shaky answer. It was an answer that didn't answer anything. And you could see it in real time. The moment where the hearing audience realized that the price tag isn't connected to the math. It's connected to something else entirely. Because if you can pave the entire border and still have tens of billions left over, the question isn't, what does the wall cost? The question becomes, why is DHS hiding what the money is actually for? And that's the part Noem seemed completely unprepared for. Her responses felt like talking points, numbers without context, explanations without logic. And when an agency this powerful can't articulate why it needs tens of billions more than the project requires, that's not a clerical issue. That's a structural issue. Something about the budgeting process has drifted far from accountability, and this moment exposed it in front of the entire country. But then the hearing took a turn even more revealing than the border math collapse. Paul shifted from wall spending to a different type of spending: DHS support for events like the Super Bowl and the World Cup. These events rake in billions in revenue. They're some of the most profitable spectacles on the planet. And yet, it's taxpayers, not the NFL, not FIFA, who are covering the bill for security support. Think about that. Families who will never afford a Super Bowl ticket. People who will never attend a World Cup match. Regular taxpayers are funding security for some of the richest corporations in the world. And when Paul asks whether these entities pay DHS for that support, Noem's answer is stunningly vague. Not to my knowledge. That's it. No justification. No breakdown of agreements. No explanation for why billion-dollar organizations are effectively being subsidized by a government that constantly says it can't afford basic services. This isn't national security. This is corporate privilege dressed up as public duty. And here's the larger problem. Once you blur that line, it becomes impossible to tell where security ends and favoritism begins. Rumors online have long suggested that large event organizers lobby hard for government-backed security because it saves them millions. And based on Noem's non-answers, those rumors suddenly feel a lot less far-fetched. Because if DHS is willing to demand $46 billion for a wall with unexplained calculations, why wouldn't it also funnel taxpayer resources into private interests without public scrutiny? Once you remove transparency, anything becomes possible. But the most alarming moment of the hearing wasn't about money at all. It was about power, specifically DHS's growing surveillance authority. Paul brought up the Quiet Skies program, and everything in the room shifted. This wasn't about fencing contracts or corporate subsidies. This was about Americans being monitored by federal air marshals without their knowledge. And when he mentioned Tulsi Gabbard, a former member of Congress, allegedly being tracked on flights, the hearing's tone changed instantly. Because if someone with her profile can be monitored quietly, what does that mean for everyone else? There were also reports of an air marshal's spouse being followed. In another case, an air marshal was allegedly surveilled by his own agency. None of it makes sense. None of it fits into standard procedure. And when Paul demanded clarity, who authorized it? Who was held accountable? What reforms are coming? Noem's answers felt lighter than air. She didn't deny the incidents. She didn't provide justification. She didn't explain the oversight process. She simply offered vague acknowledgments and promises of repercussions. But repercussions for whom? The people who carried out questionable surveillance? Or the people who blew the whistle? That distinction matters. Because in a political environment where secrecy and loyalty are prized, the wrong kind of repercussions can send a message, not to violators, but to truth-tellers. And when surveillance powers expand without public debate, oversight committees become the only line of defense between national security and civil liberties. Paul, ironically, became the voice demanding transparency. And Noem? She became the face of an agency struggling to explain how far its authority should reach. At this point in the hearing, a pattern began to emerge. Billions requested without justification. Federal resources provided to billion-dollar corporations without reimbursement. Surveillance programs drifting into civilian monitoring with no clear guardrails. These are not small administrative hiccups. These are signs of an agency operating on improvisation instead of strategy, habits instead of rules, political pressure instead of public duty. Something is expanding inside DHS, budget, authority, mission, and it's expanding faster than the systems designed to control it. The border math was just the first tear in the fabric. Once Paul tugged on it, the entire tapestry of DHS operations began unraveling. And the person at the center of it, Noem, seemed unable or unwilling to explain the bigger picture. She wasn't just dodging specifics. She was dodging responsibility. Because once you admit that the budget doesn't make sense, you have to admit that the planning doesn't make sense either. And once you admit that surveillance programs lack boundaries, you have to admit someone allowed it to happen. That kind of admission rarely comes easily. What viewers witnessed was a rare thing. A public moment where a powerful agency's weaknesses were exposed not through accusations, but through its own inability to answer basic questions. No shouting, no fireworks, just simple math, simple logic, and an avalanche of contradictions. And the implications are enormous. If DHS can't account for billions, what else can it account for? If it provides federal resources to private organizations without reimbursement, who else is benefiting behind the scenes? If it monitors individuals without clear justification, how widespread is the practice? When agencies stretch themselves beyond oversight, the distance between government authority and public protection widens. And once that gap widens enough, it becomes impossible to close. What this hearing ultimately revealed is not a disagreement over a wall. It's a warning about what happens when transparency disappears from national security decisions. A warning about what happens when budgets expand faster than accountability. A warning about what happens when surveillance programs grow without public consent. Rand Paul wasn't trying to expose a crisis, but he stumbled into one. And Noem's vague, fragmented answers didn't calm the situation. They confirmed it. The biggest question now isn't whether DHS overspent or overreached. The real question is, how much of this has been happening without anyone noticing? Because if this much confusion gets revealed accidentally in a single hearing, imagine what remains hidden in the parts of government that Congress never gets to see. If you found this breakdown helpful and want more deep dive explanations that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening inside these hearings, make sure you like the video, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Your support helps keep these investigations going.